The fortress of San Leo rises from the rocky heights of the Italian countryside like a monument to human will. Its walls, carved from the very stone upon which it stands, have witnessed the rise and fall of princes, the machinations of power, and the eternal struggle between strength and weakness that defines the human condition. It was here, in the shadow of these ancient stones, that Niccolò Machiavelli first understood a truth that would reshape his understanding of power: those who explain themselves are already defeated. The morning mist clung to the valley below as Lorenzo de' Medici's envoy arrived at the fortress gates. He carried with him documents, justifications, and elaborate explanations for recent political decisions that had stirred unrest among the noble families. The Duke of Urbino, Guidobaldo de Montefeltro, received these explanations with the polite attention due to a powerful ally, nodding at appropriate intervals and offering reassuring words. Yet beneath the diplomatic facade, both men understood the fundamental shift that had occurred. By explaining, Lorenzo had revealed weakness. By requiring explanation, he had admitted doubt. In that moment, the delicate balance of power had tilted. Machiavelli observed this exchange from the shadows of the great hall, his keen mind cataloguing every gesture, every inflection, every subtle acknowledgement of vulnerability. He had come to understand that power operates according to laws as immutable as those governing the movement of celestial bodies. Just as a planet maintains its orbit through the balance of forces, political power maintains its position through the careful management of perception and the absolute refusal to submit to the weakness of justification. The first law of this celestial mechanics of power revealed itself with crystalline clarity: explanation is the enemy of authority. When a ruler begins to justify his actions, he transforms from sovereign to supplicant. He shifts the locus of power from his will to the judgment of others. In that shift, he destroys the very foundation upon which his authority rests. The moment a prince explains why he acted, he implicitly acknowledges that his actions require external validation. He admits that his will alone is insufficient. He confesses that he serves masters other than himself. This truth manifested itself repeatedly throughout the Italian peninsula during those tumultuous years when city-states rose and fell with the frequency of summer storms. Cesare Borgia understood it intuitively when he seized Imola and Forli without preamble or justification. He did not convene councils to debate the righteousness of his cause. He did not dispatch envoys to explain the legal precedents supporting his claim. He simply acted, with the terrible efficiency of natural law itself. The territories fell not because his explanations were compelling, but because his actions were decisive. His power grew not from the strength of his arguments, but from the absence of argument itself. In stark contrast stood the fate of Piero Soderini, the Gonfalonier of Florence, whose reign collapsed beneath the weight of his own reasonableness. Soderini governed through consensus, explained every decision to multiple constituencies, and sought to justify each action through elaborate appeals to republican virtue and collective wisdom. His explanations were eloquent, his reasoning impeccable, his moral foundation unassailable. Yet precisely because of these qualities, he became powerless. Each explanation diminished his authority. Each justification revealed his dependence on others' approval. Each appeal to external validation confirmed his internal weakness. When the Spanish army approached Florence's gates, Soderini's careful explanations proved as ineffective as prayers against artillery. The contrast between these two approaches illuminated a fundamental principle that governs not merely political power, but all forms of human dominance and submission. Power flows toward those who assume it and away from those who question their right to possess it. The man who acts as though his authority requires no justification often finds that it truly requires none. The man who believes his power needs explanation invariably discovers that explanation breeds further questioning, further doubt, further erosion of the very thing he seeks to preserve. This principle extends far beyond the realm of princes and republics into the intimate chambers of personal relationships, the counting houses of commerce, and the subtle hierarchies that govern every human interaction. Watch a master craftsman at work, and observe how he never explains why he chooses one tool over another, why he cuts at this angle rather than that, why he judges the work complete or insufficient. His authority derives from his refusal to subject his expertise to the judgment of those who lack it. The moment he begins explaining his choices to an apprentice as though they were equals in understanding, he diminishes his mastery and elevates the student beyond his proper station. Consider the merchant who has built his fortune through decisive action and intuitive judgment. When he begins explaining his investment decisions to partners or customers, when he justifies his pricing to those who question it, when he defends his methods to competitors who seek to understand them, he transforms his advantages into vulnerabilities. His explanations become a map that others can follow, a formula they can replicate, a weakness they can exploit. The very act of explanation distributes his power among those who receive it. In the realm of personal relationships, this law operates with even greater subtlety and devastation. The parent who explains every rule to a child as though the child were capable of adult judgment teaches the child to question rather than obey. The explanation transforms parental authority from natural law into negotiable contract. The husband or wife who justifies every decision to a spouse, who explains every choice as though seeking permission, gradually transfers the real power of the relationship to the one who sits in judgment. The teacher who explains why students should respect knowledge rather than simply embodying that knowledge finds that explanation breeds contempt rather than reverence. Yet the deepest application of this principle concerns not the power we exercise over others, but the power we possess over ourselves. Here, in the private chambers of the soul where no external observer can penetrate, the law reveals its most profound and transformative implications. For just as explanation weakens external authority, self-justification weakens internal strength. The man who constantly explains his actions to himself, who justifies his choices through elaborate internal debates, who seeks to validate his decisions against external standards, creates within himself the very weakness that others will eventually exploit. This internal weakness manifests in countless ways throughout daily existence. It appears in the endless rehearsal of arguments that never come, the mental preparation of justifications for actions not yet taken, the constant comparison of personal choices against imagined critics. It reveals itself in the paralysis that strikes when every decision must be defended, every choice justified, every action explained not only to the world but to the tribunal of self-doubt that has been permitted to establish itself within the mind. The weak man explains himself to himself constantly. He wakes each morning already composing justifications for how he will spend his day. He chooses his clothing not from personal preference but from anticipation of others' judgments. He speaks words designed to preempt criticism rather than express truth. He moves through the world in a constant state of internal defense, always preparing explanations for choices not yet questioned, justifying actions not yet criticized, defending positions not yet attacked. This internal court of explanation and justification becomes the source of all his external weakness. The transformation from weakness to strength begins with the recognition that explanation is always a choice, never a requirement. No law of nature demands that any man justify his existence to the universe. No cosmic authority requires that human actions be defended before an external tribunal. The sun does not explain why it rises each morning. The oak tree does not justify its decision to grow tall rather than remain a sapling. The river does not defend its choice of path to the sea. Each follows its nature without apology, without explanation, without the weakness of self-doubt. When a man refuses to explain himself, he aligns himself with these natural forces. He declares his intention to act from internal authority rather than external validation. He announces that his will, his judgment, and his choices are sufficient unto themselves. This refusal creates a protective barrier around his essential self, preventing the dissipation of power that occurs whenever internal authority is subjected to external review. The refusal to explain oneself does not mean the abandonment of all consideration for others' perspectives or the embrace of arbitrary selfishness. Rather, it represents the establishment of proper hierarchy between internal authority and external influence. It means making decisions from a center of personal strength rather than from anticipation of others' reactions. It means choosing actions because they align with one's deepest understanding of what is right and necessary, not because they can be successfully defended in an imaginary court of public opinion. This refusal manifests differently in various spheres of life, but always with the same fundamental principle: the preservation and strengthening of internal authority through the protection of decision-making processes from external corruption. In professional settings, it means acting from expertise and judgment rather than from fear of criticism. It means making difficult decisions without the comfort of consensus, taking responsibility without the safety net of shared blame, and accepting consequences without the refuge of elaborate justification. In personal relationships, this refusal creates space for authentic connection by eliminating the need to constantly defend one's essential self. Instead of explaining why one thinks or feels or chooses as one does, the strong person simply embodies their authentic nature. This creates clarity rather than confusion, respect rather than manipulation, genuine intimacy rather than the false closeness born of mutual explanation and justification. The practice of this refusal requires the development of what might be called philosophical courage, the willingness to exist as oneself without apology, to make choices without universal approval, to accept responsibility without the comfort of external validation. This courage grows stronger with exercise, like a muscle that develops through resistance. Each time a person acts from internal authority rather than external pressure, each time they refuse to explain what needs no explanation, each time they choose strength over the temporary comfort of justification, they build the capacity for greater autonomy and more authentic power. Yet this first principle, powerful as it may be, represents only the foundation of true transformation. For while refusing to explain oneself prevents the dissipation of power, it does not necessarily create power where none existed before. The man who possesses a weak self, regardless of how skillfully he protects it from external judgment, remains fundamentally vulnerable to the forces that prey upon weakness. His refusal to explain may preserve what little strength he has, but it cannot manufacture strength from nothing. This recognition led Machiavelli to his deeper understanding that true invincibility requires not merely the protection of the self, but the deliberate destruction of whatever within that self remains weak. The man who destroys his weak self creates something that can never be destroyed by others, for he removes from himself everything that enemies might use against him. He becomes like a fortress built upon solid rock rather than shifting sand, immune to the sieges that topple lesser men. The weak self consists of all those elements within a person that depend upon external validation for their existence. It encompasses the false identities constructed to please others, the adopted opinions designed to win approval, the manufactured preferences calculated to avoid conflict, and the countless small compromises that gradually erode authentic selfhood. The weak self is everything within a person that can be threatened, manipulated, or destroyed by outside forces because it was created in response to those forces rather than emerging from genuine internal development. Most people spend their lives adding to this weak self rather than destroying it. They accumulate identities like possessions: the successful professional, the devoted parent, the loyal friend, the respected community member. Each of these identities brings certain satisfactions, but each also creates vulnerabilities. The successful professional can be threatened with career destruction. The devoted parent can be manipulated through concern for children. The loyal friend can be betrayed. The respected community member can be subjected to social ostracism. Every identity that depends upon external recognition creates a point of weakness that others can exploit. The destruction of the weak self requires the systematic identification and elimination of these dependencies. It begins with the honest recognition of how much of one's current identity depends upon others' opinions, others' approval, others' cooperation. This recognition often proves shocking to those who have never examined their psychological architecture with clear eyes. The person who believes himself independent may discover that his sense of worth depends entirely upon professional success. The individual who considers herself self-sufficient may realize that her happiness requires constant social validation. The man who thinks himself strong may find that his confidence rests upon others' fear or admiration. Once these dependencies are identified, the work of destruction can begin. This destruction is not the random violence of vandalism, but the careful surgery of a master craftsman removing everything that weakens the essential structure. It requires the deliberate abandonment of false identities that have provided comfort and security. It demands the voluntary surrender of sources of validation that have become psychological crutches. It necessitates the uncomfortable process of discovering who one actually is when stripped of all the elaborate costumes worn to please others. This process resembles nothing so much as the alchemical work of ancient philosophers who sought to transform base metals into gold through the application of fire and pressure. The weak elements of the personality must be subjected to the heat of honest self-examination until they dissolve, leaving behind only those aspects of character that can withstand any external assault. What emerges from this process is not a diminished person, but a concentrated essence of genuine selfhood. The man who has destroyed his weak self becomes impossible to manipulate because he no longer possesses the psychological hooks that manipulation requires. He cannot be threatened with the loss of a false identity because he has already abandoned it. He cannot be bribed with promises of validation because he no longer seeks external approval. He cannot be intimidated by the prospect of social rejection because he has already accepted the possibility of standing alone. Having deliberately removed everything that others might use against him, he achieves a form of invincibility that no external force can breach. This invincibility manifests in daily life as an unshakable serenity in the face of circumstances that would devastate those who remain attached to their weak selves. The man who has destroyed his need for professional recognition cannot be controlled through career threats. The person who has abandoned the requirement for social approval cannot be manipulated through gossip or ostracism. The individual who has eliminated dependence upon others' love cannot be enslaved through emotional blackmail. Each abandoned weakness becomes a source of strength, each destroyed dependency creates greater autonomy. Yet this destruction must be approached with wisdom and precision. The goal is not to eliminate all connection to the external world or to embrace a nihilistic rejection of everything meaningful. Rather, it is to distinguish between authentic connections that strengthen the essential self and false dependencies that weaken it. The love for one's children that emerges from genuine care differs fundamentally from the need for their approval that stems from insecurity. The professional dedication that flows from true calling differs entirely from the career ambition driven by status anxiety. The social connections based on mutual respect and shared values differ completely from the relationships maintained through fear of loneliness. The wise destroyer of the weak self preserves and strengthens everything authentic while ruthlessly eliminating everything false. This discrimination requires the development of what might be called spiritual intelligence, the ability to distinguish between what serves the essential self and what merely flatters the ego, between what contributes to genuine growth and what provides temporary comfort, between what increases real power and what merely maintains the illusion of strength. Through this process of careful destruction and selective preservation, a person gradually constructs an identity that cannot be touched by external forces because it depends upon nothing external for its existence. This is not the empty invulnerability of the sociopath who feels nothing, but the full invulnerability of the sage who has transcended the need for anything he cannot provide for himself. Such a person moves through the world with the confidence of one who has nothing to lose because he has already voluntarily surrendered everything that could be taken from him. This transformation creates what ancient philosophers called autarky, complete self-sufficiency. Not the crude self-sufficiency of the hermit who avoids all human contact, but the refined self-sufficiency of one who engages fully with the world while remaining uncompromised by it. Such a person can love without neediness, work without desperation, compete without fear, and face loss without devastation. He has become psychologically immune to the forces that control others because he has removed from himself everything that those forces might attack. The cultivation of this invulnerability requires daily practice and constant vigilance. Each day presents new opportunities to choose between strength and weakness, between authentic self-expression and calculated performance, between internal authority and external approval seeking. The person committed to destroying his weak self must approach these choices with the discipline of an athlete training for competition. Every decision to act from strength rather than fear, every choice to speak truth rather than diplomatic comfort, every selection of authentic expression over strategic positioning contributes to the ongoing destruction of weakness and the construction of invulnerability. This daily practice gradually transforms not only the individual but his relationship to power itself. For as the weak self is destroyed and the authentic self emerges, a person discovers that true power was never about dominating others or accumulating external advantages. Real power is the capacity to remain oneself regardless of circumstances, to act from internal authority regardless of external pressure, to maintain integrity regardless of consequence. This power cannot be given or taken, bought or sold, inherited or stolen. It can only be developed through the deliberate cultivation of strength and the systematic elimination of weakness. The convergence of these two principles creates a transformation that transcends their individual effects. The refusal to explain oneself protects authentic power from dissipation, while the destruction of the weak self creates that authentic power in the first place. Together, they form a comprehensive approach to the development of what might be called sovereign selfhood, the condition of being answerable ultimately to oneself alone, not through selfish disregard for others but through the establishment of an internal source of authority so strong and pure that it requires no external validation. This sovereign selfhood represents the highest achievement of human psychological development. It is the state that all great leaders, artists, philosophers, and spiritual teachers have attained, though few have described it with the clarity it deserves. It is the source of that mysterious quality we call presence, the ability to command attention and respect without effort, to influence others without manipulation, to lead without coercion. People are naturally drawn to those who have achieved sovereign selfhood because such individuals radiate the confidence and serenity that comes from internal wholeness. Yet the path to this achievement requires sacrifices that few are willing to make. It demands the surrender of many comforts that most people consider essential: the comfort of being understood by others, the security of social approval, the pleasure of being able to blame external circumstances for internal dissatisfaction. It requires accepting full responsibility for one's thoughts, emotions, choices, and consequences without the relief of being able to justify weakness through reference to difficult circumstances. Most challenging of all, it requires the courage to discover who one actually is beneath all the accumulated layers of social conditioning, family expectations, cultural programming, and personal history. This discovery often reveals that much of what a person believed about himself was illusion, much of what he valued was borrowed from others, and much of what he feared losing was never truly his in the first place. The process can be profoundly disorienting, like waking from a vivid dream to discover that nothing was as it seemed. Yet for those who persist through this disorientation, who continue the work of destruction and reconstruction even when it becomes uncomfortable or frightening, a reward awaits that justifies every sacrifice: the achievement of true freedom. Not the political freedom that depends upon the benevolence of governments, not the economic freedom that depends upon material abundance, not the social freedom that depends upon others' tolerance, but the psychological freedom that depends upon nothing external at all. This freedom manifests as an unshakable peace that no external circumstance can disturb, a joy that requires no external source, and a strength that grows stronger under pressure rather than weaker. It is the freedom of knowing that whatever happens in the external world, one's essential self remains untouched and untouchable. It is the freedom of being able to face any loss without being diminished, any criticism without being wounded, any challenge without being defeated. The person who has achieved this freedom becomes a source of strength for others, not through preaching or teaching, but through example. Others sense the presence of someone who has transcended the fears and anxieties that torment most human beings. They are drawn to that strength like plants turning toward sunlight, hoping to absorb some of its warmth and vitality. Yet this influence occurs without effort or intention on the part of the free person. It is simply the natural effect of authentic strength upon everything around it. Such individuals often become the real leaders of their communities, regardless of their formal positions or titles. People instinctively turn to them for guidance not because they seek followers, but because they embody the possibility of human transcendence. They demonstrate that it is possible to live with dignity and strength regardless of circumstances, to maintain integrity regardless of pressure, to find peace regardless of chaos. Their very existence challenges others to examine their own lives and consider whether they too might transcend the limitations they have accepted as inevitable. The influence of such people extends far beyond their immediate circles. Throughout history, individuals who have achieved sovereign selfhood have served as catalysts for human development, inspiring others to question their assumptions about what is possible and to begin their own journeys toward psychological freedom. They plant seeds of possibility that may not germinate for generations, but which eventually contribute to the slow evolution of human consciousness toward greater autonomy and authenticity. In our current age, when external pressures toward conformity have reached unprecedented levels of sophistication and intensity, the cultivation of sovereign selfhood becomes not merely a personal luxury but a spiritual necessity. The technologies of manipulation have grown so refined, the systems of control so pervasive, that only those who have achieved internal independence can hope to maintain their essential humanity. The rest risk becoming unconscious components in vast machinery designed to harvest their attention, energy, and will for purposes they do not understand and masters they have never seen. The development of sovereign selfhood thus represents a form of resistance to the forces that seek to reduce human beings to predictable, controllable units of economic and political production. By refusing to explain themselves to those who have no authority to judge them, by destroying the weak aspects of themselves that can be manipulated and controlled, individuals reclaim their birthright as free conscious beings capable of authentic choice and genuine self-determination. This reclamation requires no permission from external authorities because it operates in the realm of consciousness itself, which remains beyond the reach of any external power. No government can legislate what a person thinks in the privacy of his own mind. No corporation can control how an individual chooses to respond to circumstances. No social pressure can force someone to betray their deepest convictions if they possess the strength to resist. The sovereignty achieved through the destruction of the weak self and the refusal to explain oneself to inappropriate authorities creates an island of freedom that no external force can invade. From this island of freedom, a person can engage with the world more effectively than ever before. Paradoxically, by becoming independent of external validation, one becomes more capable of contributing value to others. By destroying the weak self that sought approval, one strengthens the authentic self that has genuine gifts to offer. By refusing to explain oneself to those who lack the wisdom to understand, one becomes more capable of teaching those who are ready to learn. The sovereign individual thus becomes not an isolated hermit but a more effective participant in human community. He contributes not from neediness or the desire for recognition, but from abundance and the natural overflow of internal strength. His relationships become more authentic because they are based on choice rather than dependency, his work becomes more valuable because it emerges from passion rather than desperation, and his influence becomes more positive because it stems from genuine wisdom rather than manipulative cleverness. This is the ultimate promise of Machiavelli's teaching when properly understood, not the creation of cynical power seekers who manipulate others for personal advantage, but the development of authentic human beings who have transcended the need for such manipulation because they have discovered the source of true power within themselves. Such people become natural leaders not because they seek to dominate others, but because they have learned to master themselves. They influence not through deception or coercion, but through the magnetic attraction of genuine strength and wisdom. The path they offer to others is not easy, for it requires the same sacrifices they themselves have made. It demands the same courage to face uncomfortable truths, the same discipline to destroy comforting illusions, the same persistence to continue the work even when it becomes difficult or frightening. Yet for those willing to pay this price, the reward is nothing less than complete human freedom, the achievement of a state of being that no external force can diminish, no circumstance can disturb, and no passage of time can erode. In the end, the greatest power is not the ability to control others, but the achievement of complete self-control. The greatest freedom is not the absence of external constraints, but the presence of internal strength. The greatest victory is not the defeat of external enemies, but the transformation of internal weakness into unassailable strength. These achievements remain available to every person willing to undertake the work they require, regardless of external circumstances or social position. They represent the democratic possibility that lies at the heart of human existence, the opportunity for every individual to become, through their own effort and determination, a sovereign being capable of true self-determination. This possibility stands as a permanent invitation to transcendence, waiting for those with the wisdom to recognize it and the courage to accept its demands. In accepting this invitation, individuals not only transform themselves but contribute to the elevation of human consciousness itself, adding their light to the collective illumination that slowly drives back the darkness of ignorance, fear, and spiritual servitude that has plagued humanity throughout its history. They become living proof that freedom is not a gift that can be granted by others, but an achievement that must be won through the deliberate cultivation of internal strength and the systematic destruction of everything within oneself that can be conquered by external force. The fortress of San Leo still stands upon its rocky height, a monument to the enduring truth that some things cannot be taken by force because they rest upon foundations too solid to be shaken. So too stands the sovereign self, built upon the bedrock of internal authority and protected by the refusal to submit to inappropriate judgment. Such a self, once properly constructed, becomes as permanent as those ancient stones, as unassailable as the mountain upon which they rest, and as enduring as the principles that guided their placement. It represents humanity's highest achievement, the creation of a being who is truly free because he has made himself incapable of being enslaved.